Her blood still pulsed warm as she raised her eyes. Rain lashed against the manor's window panes like impatient fingers, and the echo of his footsteps still vibrated on the stone floor. She knew she should retreat, should lower her head as she always did. But something in the way he observed her, as if seeing through the mask of servitude she wore, made her remain motionless. Her maid's dress clung to her trembling body, and the air smelled of melted candle wax and ancient secrets. Between them, the silence weighed more than words ever could. Before we delve into this story, share your thoughts in the comments below. Rate it 1 to 10 and tell us where you're reading from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. The mist crept through the stone corridors like a restless spirit searching for peace. She walked barefoot, her feet already accustomed to the cold that rose from the floor and settled into her bones like a permanent reminder of her station. The castle breathed around her. Ancient timbers creaked. Curtains whispered secrets to the wind. Shadows moved independently of the candlelight. Her name was Isabella, though few remembered it. To the cook, she was just girl. To the housekeeper, the orphan. To the butler, that one. 16 years of life and 12 working within those walls that held stories she would never dare to ask about. Her fingers, calloused from hours of scrubbing stone and polishing silver, knew every corner of that place better than her own reflection. Morning arrived, grey through the high windows, painting the world in shades of melancholy. She carried the water basin up the spiral staircase, her breath forming small clouds in the frigid air. Steam rose from her hands, like an offering to gods who had long forgotten her. Every movement was silent. Years of invisibility had taught her to tread like a phantom, to exist without disturbing the precarious balance of her world. The corridor leading to the main chambers seemed longer each day. Tapestries hung like dead skin on the walls, depicting scenes of hunts and battles she would never fully comprehend. Kings with severe faces watched her from portraits, and she always averted her gaze, as if she didn't deserve to bear the weight of those painted eyes that seemed too alive. The oak door to the master bedroom was ajar. She hesitated, her trembling hand holding the bronze doorknob that chilled her palm. From the other side came a different kind of silence, not the absence of sound, but the presence of something choosing to remain quiet. The air smelled of leather and something more indefinable, something that made her heart beat erratically against her ribs. She pushed the door open carefully, and the creak of the hinges echoed like the lament of a trapped creature. The room was vast, steeped in a gloom that seemed to have its own texture. The red velvet curtains were drawn, but a sliver of light cut the room in half, creating a golden path that led to the four-poster bed. There, among white sheets that looked like shrouds, a human silhouette rested motionless. She entered on tiptoe, her heart now a dull drum in her ears. There was something wrong with that stillness. The man's chest didn't rise and fall as it should. His skin, what little she could see, was too pale, almost translucent. She drew closer, driven by a curiosity that fought against the instinct to flee. It was then that he opened his eyes. It wasn't a gradual awakening, sweet like dawn. It was sudden, complete, as if he had never been sleeping. His eyes were dark as bottomless wells, and when they focused on her, Isabella felt the world tilt slightly. It was as if time had choked, as if reality needed to adjust to accommodate the presence of that gaze. She should have retreated. She should have murmured apologies and run through the corridors until she hid in the safety of the kitchen. But her feet had turned to lead, and her voice vanished like smoke. She stood there, holding the basin that now trembled in her hands, feeling exposed under the weight of his scrutiny. He rose from the bed with a fluidity that defied the laws she knew about human movement. There was no effort, no haste. He simply ceased to be lying down and was now seated, as if gravity obeyed him differently. His dark hair fell over his shoulders in waves that seemed to absorb the room's scant light, and when he tilted his head to the side, studying her, she felt a shiver run down her spine like an icy finger. "Who are you?" The voice was low, velvety, carrying an accent she couldn't identify. Each word seemed carefully chosen, polished like a precious gem before being offered to the world. Isabella tried to find her voice, but what came out was only a broken whisper. "Isabella, sir. I was just bringing fresh water for—" He raised a hand, and the gesture was enough to interrupt her. It was a beautiful hand, with long fingers and perfectly manicured nails, but there was something in the pallor of his skin that suggested it had never known the true warmth of the sun. He studied her in silence for a few moments that seemed to stretch into centuries. "How long have you worked here, Isabella?" The way he pronounced her name made something strange happen in her chest, as if, for the first time in years, she truly existed. Since forever, sir. Since I was small." Her voice was still faint, but at least it came out. He nodded slowly, as if that information confirmed some suspicion. Then he did something she would never expect. He smiled. It wasn't a wide or warm smile, but it had a hypnotic quality that made her momentarily forget how to breathe. "And did no one ever tell you this room is forbidden?" Her blood ran cold. Of course it was forbidden. Everything on that floor was forbidden for someone like her. But the housekeeper had fallen ill, and someone needed to— Forgive me, sir. The housekeeper is ill, and I thought that— You thought. He repeated the words as if they were fascinating. "It's dangerous to think too much in this place, little Isabella." The way he called her little should have sounded condescending, but there was a strange tenderness in those words, as if he genuinely cared for her well-being. She didn't understand why it both reassured and terrified her at the same time. He then rose from the bed, and she noticed he was wearing only a white shirt, open at the chest. The exposed skin was living marble, and there was something hypnotic in the way the dim light danced over it. It was like observing a Greek statue that had decided to come to life. "You shouldn't be here," he said, walking to the window. Each step was silent, predatory. "But since you are—" He pulled the curtains open with a single motion, and daylight flooded the room like dammed water finally released. Isabella blinked, momentarily blinded, but when her vision adjusted, he had vanished. She stood there, alone, her heart beating so fiercely she was certain the entire castle could hear it. The basin still trembled in her hands, the water creating small ripples that reflected the light like liquid silver. The room seemed normal now, just a large, well-appointed room, empty. But the air still carried his scent, something between aged wood and spices she couldn't quite name. And on the bed's pillows there was a depression that suggested someone had been there moments before, though she now doubted her own testimony. She left the room with hurried steps, but not running, the discipline of years of servitude still in her. She closed the door behind her and leaned against it for a moment, trying to regain her breath. The corridor seemed different now, as if her perspectives had irrevocably shifted. In the days that followed, she found herself thinking of those dark eyes, of that voice that turned her name into music. She continued with her daily chores, washing, scrubbing, serving, but a part of her remained in that room, in that suspended moment between dream and waking, and sometimes, when she walked the corridors late at night, she felt a presence watching her from the shadows. It wasn't menacing, but it was intense, as if someone were memorizing every detail of her movements. She never looked directly into the shadows, but she knew he was there. Fear and curiosity danced in her chest like reluctant partners, and she began to understand that her life had divided into two moments, before that encounter and after it, and there was no turning back. The whispers began 3 days later. Isabella felt them, like tiny needles piercing the air around her as she worked. They weren't loud or obvious voices. They were murmurs that silenced when she approached, smiles that didn't reach the eyes, gazes that followed her like shadows clinging to her skirt. The kitchen, which had always been her refuge, now pulsed with a tension she couldn't name. Mrs. Cordelia, the housekeeper who had recovered from her illness with surprising speed, watched Isabella with the eyes of a hungry hawk. She was a middle-aged woman with angular features and a way of pursing her lips that turned any expression into disapproval. She always wore the same dark grey dress, tight at the neck like an elegant muzzle, and her hands, white and thin as bird bones, never seemed to rest. "Girl," her voice cut the air like a rusty razor. "Come here." Isabella stopped peeling potatoes and approached, wiping her hands on her apron. Her stomach twisted into knots, anticipating trouble she couldn't yet define. Mrs. Cordelia watched her from head to toe, and there was something in the inspection that made Isabella feel dirty, inadequate. "They say you've been where you shouldn't." The words dropped like stones into still water, creating ripples that spread through the kitchen's silence. "I don't know what you're talking about." The lie came out before she could consider it, instinctive as breath. Mrs. Cordelia smiled, and it was a terrible smile, all teeth and no joy. "Don't lie to me, creature. I know exactly where you've been. The question is, what do you intend to do about it?" Isabella felt her blood run cold in her veins. How could she know? Was someone watching her? Paranoia settled on her shoulders like a heavy cloak, and she had to concentrate, to keep her hands from visibly trembling. "I just brought fresh water. You were ill and someone needed to—" Someone. Mrs. Cordelia repeated the word as if it were poison on her tongue. "Someone like you mean. Someone who forgets their place." The air in the kitchen seemed to thicken, and Isabella felt as if she were breathing through wet cloth. The other maids had stopped working, pretending to be busy with their tasks, but she knew all ears were tuned to the conversation. "I'm going to be clear with you, girl." Mrs. Cordelia approached, and her perfume, violets and something medicinal, invaded Isabella's nostrils like a warning. "There are certain parts of this house that are sacred. Certain people who shouldn't be disturbed by curious little rats." The word rats struck Isabella like a slap to the face. She had been called many things over the years, orphan, creature, girl, but never a rat. There was a dehumanization in the term that made her shrink inwardly. "If I find out you've been prying where you weren't called, if I learn you've disturbed our master's peace—" Mrs. Cordelia didn't finish the sentence, but the silence that followed was charged with unspoken threats. "I understand, Mrs. Cordelia." The words came out small, submissive, exactly as they should. But deep in her chest, something burned like a forgotten ember in a fire. Mrs. Cordelia nodded, seemingly satisfied. "Excellent. Now get back to work. And remember, rats that venture where they shouldn't sometimes find traps." The rest of the day passed like a thick fog. Isabella performed her tasks mechanically, but her mind was divided between fear of Mrs. Cordelia's threats and the persistent memory of those dark eyes that seemed to see through her soul. There was a painful contradiction in her chest, the terror of being discovered, battling against the inexplicable desire to return to that forbidden room. Night arrived with winds that made the windows moan like wounded creatures. She was finishing the dinner dishes when Martha, one of the older maids, approached. Martha had a kind face and always warm hands, and she had been the closest thing to a mother Isabella had ever known. "Child," her voice was low, conspiratorial, "I need to speak with you." They retreated to a dark alcove between the kitchen and the pantry, where voices wouldn't carry. Martha held Isabella's hands in hers, and there was an urgency in her eyes that made the girl's stomach churn. "You need to be careful," Martha whispered. "Very careful." "What are you talking about?" Martha looked around, making sure they were alone. "Our master. He's not like other men. There are stories, child, ancient stories people prefer to forget." "What kind of stories?" Martha hesitated, as if the words were too dangerous to utter. "They grow pale. They stop eating. They start avoiding sunlight. And then—" she swallowed hard. "Then they vanish." A shiver ran down Isabella's spine like an icy finger. "You're trying to scare me. I'm trying to save you." Martha's voice was fierce now, desperate. "Mrs. Cordelia knows you've been there, and she has plans that don't include you staying here." "What kind of plans?" Before Martha could answer, a shadow stirred at the alcove's entrance. Mrs. Cordelia emerged from the darkness like a materialized spectre, her eyes gleaming with a light that didn't seem entirely human. "What an interesting conversation," she said, and her voice was poisoned honey. "Martha, I didn't realize you were prone to gossip." Martha straightened up, but Isabella could feel the fear radiating from her like a feverish heat. "Just maids' talk, Mrs. Cordelia. Nothing important." "Oh, but I think it is." Mrs. Cordelia smiled again, that terrible blood-chilling smile. "I think it's very important indeed, especially since it seems our little Isabella has become the center of much unwelcome attention." The silence that followed was as dense as morning fog. Isabella felt her heart beating so hard she was certain they both could hear it. "Perhaps it's time for our little orphan to find a new place to exercise her curiosity," Mrs. Cordelia continued, each word dropping like a bead of poison. "I know some families in town who always need maids, families who know how to keep young girls busy." Isabella's blood ran cold. To be sent away from the castle meant losing the only home she had ever known, however cold and hostile it might be. It meant being thrown into the world without protection, without resources, with nothing but the clothes on her back. "Please." The word left her lips before she could stop it. "I haven't done anything wrong. I merely fulfilled my duties." Mrs. Cordelia tilted her head, studying her like a cat studies a wounded mouse. "Your duties do not include disturbing our master, child, and they most certainly do not include spreading fantastical stories about him." "I haven't spread any stories." "No?" Mrs. Cordelia arched an eyebrow. "Then why was Martha here filling your head with fairy tales about disappearances and transformations?" Isabella looked at Martha, who had paled like a ghost. The older woman shook her head almost imperceptibly, a silent warning not to say anything more. I don't know what you're talking about." Mrs. Cordelia laughed, and the sound was like broken glass grating. "Of course you don't know. They never do they? Well, let me make things clear for you, my dear child." She moved closer, and Isabella could feel the cold emanating from her like waves of ice. "You will continue with your normal duties. You will keep your mouth shut, and you will stay far away from any place not explicitly designated for someone of your position. Understood?" "Yes, Mrs. Cordelia." "Excellent." Mrs. Cordelia smiled again. "Because if I find out you disobeyed, if I learn you disturbed our master again, it won't just be a new job you'll need to find. It will be a new world to live in, and believe me, child, you wouldn't survive this world without the protection of these walls." With that, she turned and disappeared into the darkness, leaving only the echo of her words and the sickly sweet scent of violets. Martha and Isabella stood there for a long moment, breathing the air that still vibrated with threats. Finally, Martha broke the silence. "You need to get out of here," she whispered, "before it's too late." But Isabella couldn't think of escape. All she could feel was the weight of those dark eyes in her memory, and the growing certainty that however dangerous it was to stay, leaving would be a form of death she wasn't prepared to face. Night deepened around the castle like a hand closing into a fist, and somewhere in the shadows she knew he was watching. And for the first time since she was a child, Isabella didn't feel completely alone. The library was a place she had never dared to set foot in. Located on the highest floor of the West Tower, it was a sanctuary of knowledge that spanned 2 stories connected by a spiral staircase of black iron. The shelves rose to the vaulted ceiling, packed with leather-bound volumes that seemed to hold secrets from long-forgotten eras. Light filtered through stained glass windows, painting the marble floor in shades of amber and crimson. Isabella had arrived there by accident, or at least that's what she told herself. She was looking for a lost broom, following clues that led her through increasingly narrow corridors and staircases that seemed endless. When she finally pushed open the heavy oak door and found herself before that magnificence, her first reaction was to retreat. But something made her hesitate. It was the scent, aged leather, yellowed parchment, and that indefinable essence she had encountered before, wood and spices. He was there. Her feet moved without conscious permission, carrying her through the aisles between the shelves. The silence was absolute, yet charged with presence. It was like walking through a cathedral, dedicated not to God, but to human knowledge accumulated over centuries. She found him seated in a dark green velvet armchair near one of the high windows. A book rested open on his lap, but he wasn't reading. He was looking through the colored glass at the gardens below, where the afternoon was slowly dyeing in shades of gold and violet. "Lost again, little Isabella?" His voice echoed softly among the shelves, carrying that same hypnotic quality that had disturbed her dreams. She froze in place, her heart pounding like a bird trapped in a cage. Forgive me, sir. I didn't know that I would be here." He turned in the armchair, and the colored light from the stained glass danced across his face in an almost supernatural way. "Or that you shouldn't be here." The question hung in the air between them like a silent challenge. Isabella knew she should run, should murmur apologies and disappear before Mrs. Cordelia discovered where she was. But there was something in the way he looked at her, not with anger or impatience, but with genuine curiosity that kept her motionless. "Both, I suppose," she admitted, surprising herself with her own honesty. He smiled, and this time the smile reached his eyes. Honesty. What a rare quality these days. He closed the book and placed it on a small table beside the armchair. "Come closer." It was a command, not a request, but there was a gentleness in it that transformed the order into an invitation. Isabella moved slowly, each step echoing in the vast space like a distant drum. "What is your name?" he asked when she stopped a few steps away. "Isabella, sir. Not your maid's name." There was infinite patience in his voice. "Your true name, what they whisper when you dream." The question disconcerted her. No one had ever asked about her dreams, about the person who existed beyond her duties. My name is Isabella. It always has been." "Ah." He tilted his head, studying her with renewed attention. "A child without a past, then?" Interesting. She didn't know how to respond to that, so she remained silent. The air around them seemed charged with electricity, as if a storm was approaching. "Can you read, Isabella?" The question caught her off guard. "A little. Martha taught me when I was small." "Martha." He repeated the name as if savoring wine. "The cook. A wise woman, though too cautious for her own good." There was something in the way he said that which sent a shiver down her spine. "Do you know her well?" I know everyone who lives under my roof." He rose from the armchair, in a fluid movement, and Isabella noticed again how tall he was, how his presence seemed to fill the space around them. "The question is, do they know me?" He walked to one of the nearest shelves and withdrew a small volume, bound in dark red leather. "This is one of my favorite books, poems from an era when words still had the power to change hearts." He held out the book to her, and when Isabella hesitated, he smiled again. "I won't bite you, child, at least not today." The joke should have reassured her, but there was something in the way he said it that made her skin tingle. Still, she accepted the book. The leather was soft beneath her fingers, warmed as if it had recently been held by living hands. "Read to me," he requested, returning to the armchair. I don't know if I can. My skills they are sufficient." There was a certainty in his voice that brooked no argument. "Open wherever you wish and read." Isabella opened the book at random. The page was written in elegant calligraphy, and the words seemed to dance under the colored light of the stained glass. She began to read, her voice small at first but gaining strength as the words flowed. "Love is a thirst that is not quenched, a hunger that grows when fed, a fire that flares with the wind and consumes what it loves most." Her voice faltered on the last line. There was something in the intensity with which he watched her that made the words dangerous, laden with meanings she dared not contemplate. "Continue," he said softly. "Fear not the darkness of love, for in it you will find the purest light. What dies in light is reborn in shadow, and what is lost is found in the search." When she finished reading the poem, silence settled between them like a veil. Isabella could hear her own breath, rapid and shallow. He watched her with an intensity that made her blood run faster. "Beautiful voice," he said finally. "There's music in it, even when you read prose." "Thank you, sir." "Adrian." The word left his lips like a confession. "My name is Adrian." The name hung in the air between them like a golden bridge connecting two banks of a dangerous river. Isabella knew that accepting this intimacy was crossing a line that shouldn't be crossed, but she found herself whispering, "Adrian." Something shifted in the air when she uttered his name. It was as if an ancient spell had been broken, or perhaps completed. He leaned forward in the armchair, and for the first time she could see his eyes clearly. They were even darker than she had remembered, but there was a depth in them that seemed to contain centuries of experience. "How long have you lived here, Isabella? In this castle, in this life of shadows?" "Since I can remember. Martha said they brought me here when I was a baby. My parents—" She swallowed hard. "My parents died in an epidemic. There was no one else. So you are truly an orphan." There was a sadness in his voice that surprised her. A child raised by strangers, without knowing the warmth of a true home. "This is my home," she said automatically, but the words sounded hollow even to her own ears. "Is it?" Adrian stood and walked to the window, watching the gardens darken with the approaching night. "Or is it simply the place where you exist?" The question cut deeper than she expected. For years, she had convinced herself that a roof and food were enough, that she needed nothing more. But the way he phrased the question made something ache in her chest, a yearning for something she had never possessed. Why does Adrian care about this?" she asked, surprised by her own audacity. He turned to look at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression that made her momentarily forget to breathe. "Because," he said slowly, "it's been a long time since I've seen true innocence in this place, and it's been even longer since I found someone who looks at me without fear or calculation. I am afraid," she admitted. "Yes, but not the kind of fear I'm familiar with. You fear the unknown, not me specifically." He approached again, each step measured like a dance. That is refreshing. There was a raw honesty in those words that made her heart quicken. Should I be afraid? Of you specifically? He stopped a few steps from her, and she could feel the cold emanating from his skin. That is a dangerous question, little Isabella. Why? Because the answer could change everything. They stood there, observing each other, in silence, as night finally claimed the gardens outside. The library seemed to sigh around them, as if the books themselves were holding their breath. It was then that they heard footsteps echoing in the corridor outside. Adrian stiffened, and for the first time, Isabella saw something akin to raw alarm cross his features. You need to go. Now. Why? Because whoever is coming wouldn't understand your presence here, and I... He hesitated, as if the next words were costly. I cannot protect you if she finds you here. The footsteps were approaching, and Isabella recognized the unmistakable sound of Mrs. Cordelia's heels on the stone floor. This way, Adrian whispered, guiding her to a hidden door behind one of the bookshelves. This staircase leads directly to the kitchen. Go. She hesitated for a moment, the book still in her hands. And this? Keep it. His fingers brushed hers when she handed him the book, and the touch was like an electric shock. Consider it a gift. The library door creaked open ominously. Isabella disappeared down the secret staircase, her heart beating so hard she was certain Mrs. Cordelia could hear it through the stones. She ran down the narrow steps, pressing the book against her chest as if it were a shield against the world. When she finally reached the kitchen, Martha was waiting for her with a panicked expression in her eyes. "Where have you been? Mrs. Cordelia has been looking for you for an hour." Isabella hid the book in the folds of her skirt. "I got lost. The corridors are confusing in the dark." Martha studied her with sharp eyes, but before she could say anything, Mrs. Cordelia appeared at the kitchen entrance. Her eyes swept the room like a hawk searching for prey, and when they landed on Isabella, they narrowed dangerously. "There you are," she said, and her voice was poisoned honey. "I've been looking for you. We need to talk." The book burned against Isabella's skin like a hidden ember, and she knew her life had irrevocably changed. She had crossed a line from which there was no return. The conversation happened in Mrs. Cordelia's office, an austere room on the ground floor that smelled of ink and disinfectant. The walls were bare except for a dark wooden crucifix and a portrait of the late lord of the castle, a man with a grizzled beard and severe eyes who seemed to judge anyone who dared to enter his domain. Isabella stood before the mahogany desk, her hands clasped in front of her body to hide their trembling. The book was hidden beneath the straw mattress in her small room, but she felt as though she still carried it against her chest, burning like evidence of her transgression. Mrs. Cordelia watched her in silence for long minutes, her pale hands resting on a stack of papers. The only sound was the tick-tock of the wall clock, each second marking like a drop of water in Chinese water torture. "Do you know why I brought you here, girl?" Mrs. Cordelia's voice cut the silence like a well-sharpened blade. "No, Mrs. Cordelia. Liar." The word came out like a spit. "I can see it in your eyes, creature. Guilt is written on every line of your pathetic face." Isabella kept her gaze fixed on the floor, observing the intricate designs of the Persian rug that covered part of the wooden floor. There was something hypnotic in those interwoven patterns, and she focused on them to avoid meeting Mrs. Cordelia's eyes. "Look up when I speak. To you." Reluctantly, Isabella raised her gaze. Mrs. Cordelia smiled, and it was the kind of smile that preceded executions. "Better. Now let's try again. Where were you this afternoon?" "Working, Mrs. Cordelia. Cleaning, organizing." "In what specific part of the castle?" The question was a trap, and Isabella knew it. Any answer she gave could be verified, contested, used against her. In several places, Mrs. Cordelia. The corridors, the pantry, the library. The two words fell like a judge's gavel. Isabella felt the blood drain from her face, leaving her dizzy and nauseated. I didn't. Don't lie to me. Mrs. Cordelia rose abruptly, her hands slamming on the table with enough force to make objects jump. Do you think I'm stupid? Do you think I don't know every move that happens in this house? The silence stretched like an abyss between them. Isabella felt her legs trembling as if they would give way at any moment. I lost a broom. I was looking for... You were looking for our master. Mrs. Cordelia circled the desk with slow, deliberate steps, like a feline approaching wounded prey. Don't deny it, I know you were. Why would I look for... Because you are a foolish, romantic girl who thinks she can seduce a man far beyond her station. Mrs. Cordelia stopped beside her, and Isabella could feel the heat of her anger radiating like a furnace. Because you think your plain little beauty can win what far more refined women have failed to obtain. The words cut like razors. Isabella had never considered herself particularly beautiful. She was just an orphan with plain brown hair and eyes that changed color depending on the light. The idea that someone could think she would try to seduce Adrian was both absurd and terrifying. I would never. That's not it. I didn't. Of course not. Mrs. Cordelia laughed, and the sound was like glass being trampled. You are just an innocent maid who just happened to find herself twice in forbidden places. What an extraordinary coincidence. Isabella closed her eyes, trying to find the strength to deny, to invent a plausible explanation. But the words refused to come. Let me tell you a story, girl. Mrs. Cordelia returned behind the desk, but didn't sit. A long time ago there was another maid in this castle. Young, beautiful, full of foolish dreams of romance and destiny. Like you, she thought she could win our master's heart. Mrs. Cordelia's voice took on an almost hypnotic tone, as if she were telling a fairy tale in reverse. She was persistent, this girl, always finding excuses to be where he was, always inventing tasks that would lead her to his chambers, and for a while it seemed her efforts had been rewarded. Isabella opened her eyes, a morbid curiosity taking hold of her despite the fear. Our master noticed her, began to talk to her, to treat her with kindness. The foolish girl thought she had won his heart, that she would be elevated from her humble position to something grand. Mrs. Cordelia paused dramatically. Can you imagine how it ended? I don't know, Mrs. Cordelia. She disappeared. The words fell like stones into still water. One morning, she simply wasn't here anymore. Her belongings remained untouched, but she had evaporated like morning mist. A shiver ran down Isabella's spine. What happened to her? Mrs. Cordelia smiled, and it was a terrible smile. Our master grew tired of her, of course, and when men like him grow tired, well, they don't leave evidence behind. Are you implying that he... I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts. Mrs. Cordelia leaned across the desk, her eyes gleaming with a cold light. And the fact is that girls who become involved with our master have the unfortunate habit of disappearing. Isabella felt the room spin slightly around her. Martha's words echoed in her memory. Those who get too close to him, they change, and then they vanish. Why are you telling me this? She managed to whisper. Because there is still time for you. You can still choose to live a simple, safe, invisible life. Mrs. Cordelia straightened up, smoothing her dress with precise gestures. Or you can continue this dangerous game and find out why that other girl was never seen again. The clock on the wall struck 9 with deep chimes that seemed to toll for someone who had not yet died. I understand perfectly, Mrs. Cordelia, Isabella said, surprised by the firmness in her own voice. Excellent. Mrs. Cordelia returned to her chair, seemingly satisfied. Now go And remember, I'll be watching, always watching." Isabella turned to leave, but Mrs. Cordelia's voice stopped her at the door. "Oh, and girl, if you possess something you shouldn't, I suggest you get rid of it immediately. Certain keepsakes can become very dangerous to hold on to." Isabella's heart stopped for a moment. She knew about the book. Somehow, Mrs. Cordelia knew. "Yes, Mrs. Cordelia," she murmured, quickly exiting the office. The corridor seemed to stretch infinitely before her. Every shadow was a threat, every sound an omen. She walked towards the maids' quarters with automatic steps, her mind spinning like a water wheel in a storm. Martha's stories, Mrs. Cordelia's warnings, Adrian's strange gentleness. Everything swirled in her head like ink spilled in water. Was there truth in the housekeeper's words? Was Adrian truly dangerous? And if so, why didn't she feel afraid when she was with him? She reached her small room and locked herself inside. The space was tiny, just a narrow bed, an old dresser, and a window that looked out onto the stable yard. But it was hers, the only place in the world where she could pretend to have some privacy. She knelt beside the bed and slipped her hand under the mattress, searching for the book. Her fingers found the soft leather and she slowly pulled it out. Even in the dim candlelight, the golden letters on its spine gleamed like a promise of secrets yet to be discovered. She opened it to the first page and found something she hadn't noticed before. A dedication written in elegant calligraphy. "To her who brought light back to eternal darkness, may these words be bridges between worlds that should never touch, yet touched by fate. A." Her fingers trembled over the words. Had he written this for her? Or had it been written for someone else long ago, for the girl who had disappeared? A sound outside the window made her look up. A shadow moved in the courtyard, too tall to be human, too fluid to be real. For a moment, she thought she saw eyes gleaming in the darkness, fixed on her window. Then nothing. She quickly closed the book and hid it again. But she knew she wouldn't be able to sleep. Mrs. Cordelia's words echoed in her mind like a funeral bell, and the dedication in the book burned in her memory like a brand of hot iron. She was caught between two worlds, that of suffocating safety and that of seductive danger. And for the first time in her life, she had to face the possibility that perhaps she couldn't remain in either. Outside, the wind began to blow harder, making the windows moan like restless spirits. And somewhere in the darkness of the castle, she knew Adrian was awake, thinking of her just as she was thinking of him. What terrified her wasn't the possibility of him being dangerous. It was the growing certainty that it no longer mattered. The following night brought a storm that made the entire castle tremble. Isabella lay awake in her narrow bed, listening to the wind howl through the stones like an army of marching demons. Rain lashed against her small window with a force that threatened to shatter the glass, and lightning illuminated her room at irregular intervals, creating dancing shadows that seemed alive. There was something in the storm that echoed the turbulence in her chest. Since the conversation with Mrs. Cordelia, she hadn't found peace. The housekeeper's words repeated in her mind like a cruel litany. "Girls who become involved with our master have the unfortunate habit of disappearing." But even with fear gnawing at her insides, she couldn't stop thinking about Adrian, the way he had said her name, the unexpected gentleness of his voice, the warmth she had felt when their fingers touched. There was a loneliness in him that she recognized, an emptiness that mirrored her own. Thunder echoed like a distant cannon, making the walls vibrate. It was then that she heard another sound, footsteps in the corridor, slow and deliberate, stopping before her door. She sat up in bed, her heart pounding. No maid would walk the corridors at this hour of the night, especially during such a storm. The sound came again, 3 soft, almost hesitant knocks. "Isabella." The voice was low, barely audible over the roar of the wind, but she recognized it immediately. Adrian. She rose from the bed with trembling legs, her bare feet touching the cold floor. She wore only a white linen nightgown, and she suddenly felt exposed, vulnerable, but there was something in the way he had pronounced her name that prevented her from hesitating. She opened the door slowly, and he was there. The dim light from the corridor created deep shadows on his face, but his eyes glowed like stars in an oil well. He wore a white shirt, open at the collar, and dark trousers, and there were raindrops in his dark hair. "Forgive me," he said, and his voice carried a contained urgency. "I know it's improper, but I needed to see you." She should have closed the door, should have screamed for help. Instead, she found herself retreating, allowing him to enter the small space that was her only refuge. He seemed giant in the tiny room. His presence filled every corner, altered the very quality of the air. The candle on the table flickered, as if it too felt his influence. "Why?" she managed to whisper. "Because," he said, closing the door behind him, "Mrs. Cordelia spoke with you today, and I know what she said." The admission caught her off guard. "How could you know?" Adrian turned to face her, and there was a pain in his eyes she hadn't expected. "Because she said the same things to others, before you." Isabella's blood ran cold. The girl who disappeared, Eleanor. He uttered the name like a prayer or a curse. Her name was Eleanor. What happened to her? Adrian walked to the small window, looking at the storm that ravaged the gardens. Rain created rivers on the glass, distorting the view like tears. "She died because of me." The words hung in the air between them like a final confession. Isabella felt the world tilt beneath her feet. "Did you kill her?" The question came out before she could stop it. "Not with my own hands." He turned, and there were centuries of weariness in his eyes. "But she died because she became involved with me, because she didn't heed the warnings, because she believed love could conquer anything." Isabella retreated until her legs met the edge of the bed. "So, Mrs. Cordelia was right. You are dangerous. More than she can imagine." Adrian approached slowly, each step measured like a dance of death. "Do you know what I am, Isabella? Can you see beyond appearances?" She observed him, the supernatural pallor of his skin, the way he moved without making a sound, the absence of warmth emanating from him. All the stories Martha had whispered, all the warnings she had ignored, crystallized into a terrible truth. "You're not human," she whispered. "Not for a long time." He stopped a few steps from her, and she could see the white fangs that extended slightly beyond his lips. "I am what you call a vampire, Isabella, an undead creature who feeds on blood and lives in the shadows." The revelation should have sent her running for the door, screaming for help. But there was something in the way he confessed, a raw vulnerability that transformed the monster into a tortured man. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked. "Because you deserve the truth. Because I don't want your death to be another burden I carry." He knelt before her, placing himself in a position of supplication. "Because for the first time in centuries I found someone who looks at me as if I were still capable of goodness." Isabella extended a hesitant hand, her fingers trembling as they touched his face. His skin was cold as marble, but smooth as silk. "And Eleanor, did you love her?" "I thought I did, but it was only loneliness disguised as love." His eyes closed beneath her touch. "She wanted to be transformed, wanted to join me in the darkness. And when I refused, she killed herself," Isabella finished, suddenly understanding. "She threw herself from the highest tower on a foggy morning. Mrs. Cordelia found the body and created the story of the disappearance to protect the family's reputation." He opened his eyes, and there were tears that would never fall. She blames me, and she's right to blame me. Thunder echoed again, closer now. The storm was intensifying, as if the world itself were reacting to the revelations being made in that small room. "And me?" Isabella asked, knowing the answer could destroy her. "What am I to you?" Adrian held her hand against his face, and she could feel the desperation emanating from him like a feverish heat. "You are light, Isabella. Light in centuries of darkness. You are goodness without calculation, humanity without a mask. And does that condemn me? Not if you are wise." He stood abruptly, beginning to pace the small space like a caged animal. "If you leave now, if you depart this place and never look back. And what if I don't want to leave?" The question stopped him mid-movement. "Then you will die. Perhaps not in the same way as Eleanor, but you will die, because to be near me is to be near death." Isabella rose from the bed, and for the first time she felt she was making a decision truly her own. "And what if I don't fear death? You should fear it. Everyone should." But there was something hopeful in his voice that contradicted the words. "How long have you been alone?" The question seemed to disarm him completely. 3 centuries, perhaps 4. The years started to blend together a long time ago. "Then you know loneliness better than anyone." She approached him, each step a conscious choice. "And I know invisibility. Perhaps we are more alike than different." "Isabella." His voice was a plea and a warning all at once. "Don't ask me to leave without giving me a real choice." She stopped before him, raising her hand to touch his chest. There was no heartbeat, just an emptiness that echoed like an abandoned cathedral. "Don't treat me like a child incapable of deciding her own destiny." He held her hand against his chest, and there was despair in his fingers. "You don't understand what you're asking." "Then show me." The words came out before she could consider them. "If I am to die by being close to you, at least let me live first." The silence that followed was filled only by the roar of the storm. Adrian watched her, as if she were a miracle and a curse simultaneously. "If I show you," he said finally, "will there be no turning back? You will see things that will change your soul forever." "My soul has already changed," she replied with an honesty that surprised her. "It changed the moment you spoke my name." He studied her face for long moments, searching for signs of doubt or fear. He found only determination and something deeper, acceptance. "Very well," he whispered, "but remember, you chose this." And then, with a fluid movement that defied human perception, he enveloped her in his arms and leapt out the window into the stormy night. The world blurred into a wash of rain and wind, a sensation of impossible flight through the darkness. Isabella should have screamed, should have struggled. Instead, she pressed herself against Adrian's cold chest and allowed him to carry her into a world she had chosen to know. When they finally landed on top of the castle's highest tower, she understood that she had crossed more than a simple physical boundary. She had entered a story that wouldn't have a happy ending, but which would be, at least, entirely her own. The world looked different from the top of the tower. Isabella remained on the stone parapet, wrapped in the coat Adrian had taken from his own shoulders, watching the storm move across the landscape like a ghostly army. From that height, the lightning seemed to dance between her fingers, and the wind carried stories of places she would never see. Adrian stood beside her, motionless as an alabaster statue. Rain streamed down his face without him seeming to notice it, and his eyes contemplated a horizon that stretched far beyond what any mortal could reach. "Eleanor jumped from here," he said finally, his voice barely audible over the roar of the wind. Isabella looked down at the stone courtyard that lay so far below it seemed to belong to another world. It must have been quick. It was. There was an ancient pain in his voice. She was wearing the white dress I'd given her. She floated down like a falling petal until... He didn't finish the sentence, but he didn't need to. Isabella could imagine the sound of the impact, the silence that followed. Do you blame her for choosing death? I blame myself for not being able to save her, for not being able to love her enough to make her life bearable. He turned to look at her, and there were centuries of weariness in his eyes. But I don't blame her for the choice. Sometimes death seems kinder than the alternative. And what was the alternative? To live knowing she would never be fully accepted, that she would always be seen as an aberration, a creature between worlds. He touched her face with icy fingers. As I am seen. Isabella covered his hand with hers. I don't see you that way. Not yet, but you will. When the reality of what I am becomes clear, when romanticization gives way to the raw truth. He shook his head. Eleanor also saw me as a romantic hero at first. I am not Eleanor. The words came out with a firmness that surprised her. And you are not responsible for the choices I make. He studied her for long moments, as if trying to memorize every detail of her face. Aren't you afraid? Of me? Of what I can do? Isabella considered the question honestly. There was fear, yes, a primitive terror in the face of the supernatural, but there was also something stronger, a connection that defied logic. I am afraid, she admitted, but not of you. I'm afraid of returning to that invisible life, of pretending this moment never happened. It would be safer. Safety was never an option for me, she smiled sadly. Orphans learn early that safety is an illusion. Adrian tilted his head, and for a moment she saw not the centuries-old predator, but the man he had been before the transformation, young, lost, desperately alone. If I asked, he said, slowly, if I begged you to leave and never look back, would you? No. The answer was immediate, definitive. Adrian closed his eyes as if she had just sealed both their fates. Then may God forgive us both, he whispered. And then he kissed her. It was a kiss that carried centuries of loneliness, decades of thirst for human connection. It was sweet and desperate at the same time, soft as silk and urgent as a last breath. Isabella felt the world disappear around them, the storm, the tower, the danger. Everything dissolved into the sensation of those cold lips against hers. When they parted, she was trembling, but not from cold. Something had changed in the air between them, as if an invisible barrier had dissolved forever. Now you carry a part of me, he said, and there was sadness and wonder in his voice. And I carry a part of you. There is no undoing this. I don't want to undo it. He smiled then, and it was the first genuinely happy smile she had seen on his face. Then let's face the consequences together. The return to the castle was different from their departure, slower, more careful. Adrian carried her through a library window, and they remained there for a few moments, listening to the silence that followed the storm. I should take you back to your room, he said, but made no move to go. You should, she agreed, but also didn't move. It was then that they heard footsteps in the corridor, multiple pairs of feet approaching quickly. Adrian stiffened, pushing Isabella behind one of the tall bookshelves. They know, he whispered. Someone saw. The library door burst open violently, and Mrs. Cordelia entered, followed by 3 men Isabella didn't recognize. They wore dark clothing and carried crucifixes and wooden stakes. Vampire hunters. Where is she? Mrs. Cordelia's voice was a venomous hiss. I know you brought the girl here, creature. Adrian emerged from between the shelves with the predatory elegance she had come to recognize. "Mrs. Cordelia, what an unexpected visit. Stop this charade." One of the men stepped forward, tall, with graying hair and a scar that cut across the entire left side of his face. "We know what you are, and we know what you did to the girl. What do you think I did, Father Marcus?" Adrian's voice was dangerously low. "The same thing you did to the other one, the one who threw herself from this tower to escape your clutches." Isabella saw Adrian stiffen, his hands clenching into fists. "Eleanor made her choice. I forced her to nothing." "Lies!" Mrs. Cordelia practically shrieked. "You corrupted her, turned her into your slave, and now you're doing the same to this one. Where is the girl?" Father Marcus raised his crucifix, and Isabella saw Adrian involuntarily recoil. "Hand her over, and perhaps we'll consider a swift death." "There is no girl here." Adrian lied with absolute conviction. "Search!" Mrs. Cordelia ordered the other two men. "She has to be here." Isabella knew she would be found in a matter of minutes. The space between the shelves offered no real hiding place for determined searches. She made a decision that would change everything forever. She stepped out from her hiding place. The silence that followed was absolute. Mrs. Cordelia stared at her with a mixture of triumph and horror, while the hunters seemed unsure whether to attack Adrian or protect her. "Isabella," Adrian said, and his voice carried a deep pain. "Why?" "Because I am no coward." She walked until she stood beside him, ignoring the crucifixes pointed in her direction. "And because I will not let you fight a battle that is also mine." Mrs. Cordelia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. "See? He's corrupted her completely. Look how she defends the monster who bewitched her." "No one bewitched me," Isabella said, finding a strength she didn't know she possessed. "I made my choices freely." "Choices?" Father Marcus spat. "Girls like you have no choices when it comes to creatures like this." He planted thoughts in your mind, twisted your feelings. "You are mistaken." Isabella lifted her chin, facing the accusing gazes. "He showed me truths you prefer to ignore, that even monsters can have a heart, that even the dead can know love." "Blasphemy!" one of the hunters shouted, advancing with a stake. Adrian moved like lightning, intercepting the attack, but he didn't kill the man. He merely disarmed him and pushed him away. "I didn't come here to spill blood." "How noble," Mrs. Cordelia sneered. "But blood will be shed tonight. The only question is whose." "Then let it be mine." Isabella stepped forward, placing herself between Adrian and the hunters. "If someone must die for my choices, let it be me." The shock on all faces was visible. No one had expected an orphaned maid to have such courage. "Isabella, no," Adrian whispered behind her. "You told me I had a choice," she replied without turning. "This is my choice." And then, in a gesture that would echo through the castle corridors for generations, she reached her hand back, searching for his. When their fingers met, she felt more than the icy touch of the undead. She felt the promise that even in the dark, they would not be alone. Isabella's gesture seemed to freeze time. Father Marcus and the other hunters watched her with expressions that mixed shock and incomprehension. How could a maid, an orphan, invisible, insignificant, have the courage to place herself between them and their prey? How could she consciously choose darkness over salvation? Mrs. Cordelia was the first to recover, and her laughter echoed through the library like a banshee's wail. "See how he's corrupted her completely. The girl prefers to die with the demon than live free from his clutches." "She is not corrupted," Adrian said, his voice carrying an authority that made the candle flames flicker. "She is choosing with the purest heart I have known in 3 centuries of existence." "Pure hearts don't choose darkness," Father Marcus retorted, but there was something in his voice, an uncertainty that hadn't been there before. No? Isabella turned to face him, still holding Adrian's hand. And what is darkness, Father? Is it loving someone society condemns? Is it finding light where others see only shadows? Her words echoed through the vast space of the library, touching something deep in the silence that followed. For a moment, even the hunters seemed to hesitate. "Child," Mrs. Cordelia said, her voice softer now, almost pleading, "you don't understand what you're doing. He is a predator, a murderer. How many innocents do you think he has killed over the centuries?" The question struck Isabella like a dagger. It was the truth she had tried not to contemplate, Adrian's past, the crimes he must surely have committed to survive. "Many," Adrian answered for her, and there was a raw pain in his voice. "More than I deserve forgiveness for. More than I can bear." Isabella felt his hand tremble in hers, and she understood that this was the moment of ultimate truth. He had confessed his sins, exposed himself completely. Now she had to choose, not between life and death, but between love and judgment. "How many have you saved?" she asked in a low voice. The question caught him off guard. "What? How many have you saved? Protected? Loved?" She turned to look him directly in the eyes. "In 3 centuries of existence, there must have been moments of goodness too. Isabella, answer me." He hesitated, as if he wasn't accustomed to contemplating the luminous aspects of his shadowy existence. "Some. Not many, but some." "Then you're not just a predator." She squeezed his hand tighter. "You are a man who has sinned and a man who has loved. You are a creature who knows both darkness and light." Mrs. Cordelia stepped forward, her mask of authority finally falling to reveal desperation underneath. "Foolish girl, he will kill you just as he killed all the others." "I didn't kill Eleanor," Adrian said softly, "and I would never harm Isabella." "Lies, all of you lie." But there was something brittle in Mrs. Cordelia's voice now, as if her own conviction was cracking. Father Marcus watched her with narrowed eyes, and Isabella realized there was something deeper to that obsession. "Eleanor was your daughter," she said suddenly, comprehension striking her like lightning. The silence that followed was deafening. Mrs. Cordelia paled like a ghost, and her mask of cold authority finally shattered completely. "She was," she whispered, and for the first time her voice carried human pain instead of calculated venom. "My only daughter, my light." "And you blame her for choosing Adrian over life," Isabella continued, each word placed with surgical care. "But the truth is, you blame her for choosing anything that wasn't you." "He stole her from me," Mrs. Cordelia shrieked, and tears finally welled in her eyes. "She was all I had, and he filled her head with romanticized fantasies of eternal love." "She killed herself because she couldn't live in his world or yours," Isabella said gently, "because she felt forced to choose between 2 absolutes when all she wanted was to be loved." The truth cut through the library like a sharp blade. Mrs. Cordelia folded in on herself as if she had taken a physical blow. Father Marcus slowly lowered his crucifix. "Cordelia," he said, and his voice was full of painful understanding. "We didn't come here to avenge Eleanor. We came because you cannot accept that she made her choice." "Choice?" Mrs. Cordelia laughed through her tears. "What choice is it to die at 16? "The same one I am making now," Isabella said. "The choice to live and love as my heart commands, even if it means rejecting the safety others want to impose on me." She released Adrian's hand and took a step toward the broken woman. "But unlike Eleanor, I am not choosing between 2 worlds. I am creating a third." Adrian watched her with an expression of astonishment. "Isabella, what are you doing? What should have been done a long time ago?" She stopped before Mrs. Cordelia, extending her hand in an offer of understanding. Eleanor died because she felt alone, because she believed she had to choose between love and acceptance. But what if we didn't have to choose? "What are you talking about?" Father Marcus asked. "I'm talking about accepting that the world isn't divided between the pure and the corrupted, between saints and demons." Isabella looked at each person in the room. "I'm talking about accepting that love can bloom in the most unlikely places, and that sometimes the greatest courage lies in letting it bloom." Mrs. Cordelia raised her tear-filled eyes. "And what if I can't? What if I can't forgive?" "Then keep carrying your pain," Isabella said gently. "But stop trying to make others carry it too." The silence stretched for long moments. Finally, Father Marcus put away his crucifix and signaled for the other men to do the same. "Perhaps," he said slowly, "there is wisdom in this young woman's words. Perhaps we have confused justice with vengeance." Mrs. Cordelia remained motionless for a time that seemed eternal. Then slowly she extended her hand and touched Isabella's face. "You have her eyes," she whispered, "the same foolish determination. And what if I promise never to end up like her? If I promise to live no matter how hard it is?" Mrs. Cordelia closed her eyes, and when she opened them again, there was an exhaustion in them that spoke of years of carried pain. "Then perhaps I can try to let you try." It wasn't forgiveness. Not yet. But it was the beginning of something that could become acceptance. The hunters departed in silence, taking with them the weapons they wouldn't use that night. Mrs. Cordelia was the last to leave, pausing at the door to look once more at Adrian. "If she dies," she said simply, "I will return." "If she dies," Adrian replied, "I will be waiting." And then they stood alone in the library, surrounded by thousands of love stories that had ended in tragedy. But for the first time, Isabella felt that perhaps they could write one that would end differently. "You know it won't be easy," Adrian said, approaching her, "that there will always be those who don't understand." "I didn't expect it to be easy," she smiled, and it was a smile that carried all the courage she had discovered within herself. "But do you know what I learned tonight?" "What?" "That sometimes the most valuable things are the hardest to keep, and that true love isn't about finding someone perfect. It's about finding someone who makes our imperfection worthwhile." He kissed her then, there among the books that had witnessed their first confession of love. And when they parted, Isabella knew she had chosen more than a man or a destiny. She had chosen a new way of living. The years that followed were not easy. There were whispers, glances, moments of doubt, and nights of fear. But there were also mornings when she woke beside someone who loved her completely, and afternoons when he read poetry to her while the rain lashed against the windows. She remained human. It was her choice and theirs. She would grow old and die while he would remain young. But every day they spent together was lived fully, with the intensity of those who know that time is precious. And when her time finally came, decades later, on a golden autumn afternoon, she had no regrets. She had loved deeply, lived intensely, and proven that even the darkest stories can have moments of light. Adrian held her as she departed, whispering promises that he would keep her in his heart for the centuries to come. And Isabella smiled because she knew she had given him the greatest gift she could give, the memory that he was capable of true love. After that, they say he changed. He was still a vampire, still lived in the shadows, but there was a gentleness in him that hadn't existed before, a compassion that had blossomed from the love he had known. And sometimes, on the quietest nights, he could still hear her calling his name on the wind. The end. If this story found a mirror in your soul, leave a comment and share it. Sometimes what hurts us most is what makes us most human.